Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Belgium and week 6 of Formula G. My name is Zotomo and I'm joined as always by Calamity. How are you?
Hello, I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Yeah, back in Europe for this one, hoping for a little bit of a better time than in Taiwan. But Belgium can be pretty rough. It's has some very rural countryside with signs, but not helpful signs, as well as some pretty nicely signed cities with lots of information. So it's kind of a toss up what we'll get. So we'll see what our drivers are in store for. Did you enjoy your time in Belgium, Calamity?
I was just thinking, what do you mean a better time than in Taiwan? I've got 37 points in Taiwan. I'd much rather play Taiwan again.
Yeah, well, I think everybody else is a little bit against you, though, as we'll jump into these locations for the feature race and look at our first round. We were in the town of, it's actually blocked on my screen. I can't read it. Namur, I want to say.
Yeah, the city of Namur.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I had it right for that one. So, pretty straightforward round to start us off here, Calamity.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think, well, I don't have to think. I know no one had any problems with that, and everyone managed to 5K. It's the ninth biggest city in Belgium, and as Belgian cities usually do put their city name on their road signs or street signs, yeah, not a problem for anyone really.
Yep. Moving on to round number two, slightly more rural in a bit of a countryside, but still in that southern kind of mid south of the country.
Yeah, and again, a fairly easy round where we only saw one person dropping any points. You had a roundabout to the north that gave you the directions to quite a few different cities, so decent chance that you'd find at least some of them, as everyone happened to do.
And if everybody was enjoying the first two rounds, they didn't really enjoy round number three. We definitely were in a rural part of the country for this one. On the map, close to the N60, but in reality, a dirt road in the countryside with not a whole lot to go off of.
Yeah, I think you probably could have made it to the N60 if you just spent about 3.5 minutes of your time just walking there.
Hmm.
Um, but I doubt many people did that. You could find store signs to some bigger towns in the area, but then it was just about can you find those towns? And we definitely saw most of the problems of the seed come from here, with quite a lot of people dropping some significant points.
Round four was not a little bit better. We were in a small village, so slightly closer to civilization. But our first real location in the kind of northern part of the country.
Yes, the only location in the Dutch speaking part of Belgium. You were started on a relatively small, sort of not really a farm road, but a small road through the middle of nowhere. Um, and you could have chosen to go east or west, with west being quite clearly the better choice. But also, a lot of times in Geoguessr, you're like, oh, do I go west or east? It all looks the
Mm.
same, but in reality, one side is clearly better. In this case, you could kind of tell west went out into a field, east went into the middle of a forest. So, well, go west. And then once you made it to the main road, which was only about 400 meters away, you immediately found some good signs that told you which town you're in. And that round again, not a lot of problems for most people. There were quite a few people who actually dropped a few points here, but everyone except for I think two people at least found the right town.
Very nice. And round five saw us back into a city, well, a smaller city, not like Brussels or anything, of Hanut. Again, we saw the town name on the street signs, which meant if you were able to spot the town on the map, which wasn't too difficult, you had pretty much 3 minutes or so to pinpoint this one. And I think in our cast of this, we watched Pluki, and he probably moved like what 100 meters total
Yeah,
in order to figure out the location. So
yeah, I didn't need to move much further either. Yeah, you had pretty much everything you needed within the small village. Not actually part of the town, but well, technically part of the town. Um, you know what I mean? It's like a small village that's part of the bigger municipality.
mm,
But yeah, not much movement necessary. You had a lot of great information there. Had a church south of you, a few road names, everything you needed.
Very nice. Well, most of the drivers, if you didn't have too hard of a time in round number 3, did quite well in this. We saw lots of scores as we take a look at these standings. And we will notice that you didn't have to drop more than about 150 points to be out of the points in this one. 6 drivers getting perfect scores, distance separating these guys, and 3 of them Americans, which is a bit of a surprise, perhaps. The Americans showing some of these Europeans how it's done. A very nice day for Oberhausen with Boxa and Berryfishy Bear both taking podium spots. But it's Orpheus once again who gets the better of Boxa on distance.
Yeah, exactly the same as in Taiwan, and in Spain as well, interestingly enough. So it's the third time he's beaten out Boxer. Still consistency on Boxer's side once we come to the standings later on.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely a nice win for him. 9 meters is very impressive as well. That's very close. And yeah, as you said, quite good results for the Americans. Colin finally back in the points after 2 weeks without any, in 6th place there. And also Hidigmi and Solar Sensei, who've been struggling quite badly this season so far. With Hidigmi, who's only picked up points in 3 races before, out of which 2 were 10th places. And Solar Sensei, who's picked up points for the 3rd time this season after only having picked up 10 points so far. So quite nice for them.
Yeah, definitely nice indeed. A bit unfortunate for M. the Baseman. Did pretty well in a neighboring friendly country, but just good enough for 10th only. And yeah, Calamity, you mentioned that you had that one bad round in round 3, and that's pretty much where you lost all your points. Perfect.
Yes.
Outside of that, you can see that likes of Pizanico, probably Labum Greb, Moist Flubber, even Lunacy were probably, not Lunacy. Lunacy had 24,000, sorry. We're all probably looking at that similar thing where they had one really bad round and just kind of threw them out of the game to start with completely. So a weird thing here, we'll notice that Shumi DNS to this one, didn't get on the scoreboard at all. But if we shift over to the sprint race, we'll notice he did play. So let's take a look at those locations to start us off with. And in the order you had them in, Calamity, we started dead center, downtown Antwerp.
Yeah, that was definitely the easiest out of the 5 rounds on Prinsstad. And essentially, I found the name of the street and I was looking around and it looked like, hey, this is probably somewhere downtown. So I just looked at the map and it was like one of the first street names that stood out. So it took me a total of 30 seconds.
Fine, not too bad. Round 2, we were a bit in the suburbs in the southwest part of the city. Not too far from a major road, A112 or the N148. You might have been able to reach one of those if you didn't catch a smaller village name or district.
Yeah, I went to neither of those. This is where my problems started for this seat. I went sort of north, and you can see there's this white road sort of connecting the N148 and the A112. That's where I went, and then went east from there, but never all the way until the A112. And I did eventually find the street up there, which is called, I think it's Wilde Olympiadelaan. But I found it so late that it was at a point where I couldn't backtrack enough anymore to find where exactly I'd started. So I lost, well, 1,700 points there, meaning 500 meters.
Ouch. Yeah, cities definitely kicked on those points quite fast. We jumped across town to almost Merksem, a district in Antwerp in the north. There was a pretty nice train station, some major roads not too far away, but again, you had to work your way through some side streets to get there before you could find anything probably too helpful.
Yeah, I don't actually remember what I found in this road. I think I probably must have just found Maxim itself, because I don't think I actually made my way to any of the major roads, at least not as far as I can remember. They don't really look familiar. But yeah, I didn't really have much problems with that either. A minute and 27. We started in a relatively distinct area to pinpoint with a little, almost not really a roundabout, but road just going around a little park thing to the east, which yeah was pretty distinct. So even if you took a bit longer to maybe find a town, a road name or anything like that, shouldn't have been a problem.
Yeah, actually, if I'm just looking at the location now, if you get just down the street a bit from the starting location, a couple of these road signs do have Merksem on them.
Mm.
That would have helped you out with your pinpointing quite fast. You didn't need any of those big roads or train stations to help you. Round number 4 was the tricky and interesting one. It was way outside of town, really showing you how far the city limits of Antwerp go in a more industrial area surrounded by businesses and harbors.
Yeah, the city limits of Antwerp don't go far enough because I guessed west of it, which isn't part of Antwerp anymore.
I think the
Yeah,
river
it was
is.
pretty.
Yeah.
I think the river isn't anymore,
Hmm.
but I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, it was pretty clear from the start that you're somewhere in this huge industrial slash harbor area up there to the north, which is probably about the same size, if not bigger than the proper city of Antwerp itself.
Hmm.
Um, there aren't that many roads going through it. There's still quite a lot, but um, it's not the biggest area in terms of width. So you can kind of maybe get by with finding the river and being like, hey, we're probably somewhere there.
Hmm.
But yeah, I just couldn't figure out where exactly it was. And well, that was any hopes of points gone for me.
Mhm. Well, for me, who had to click through all of these challenges, it was the one spot that I could easily pick out on the map because I knew because I have to play all of these and I have to just get through them. I'm like, well, I know where this round is because it's way out here and it's very easy to spot.
Mm.
It's not kind of lost anything. So I actually got most of my points because I just could easily find this one. Round 5 saw us sort of back down into the more city area of the town. Not too tricky, I think. But again, sort of in the suburbs, you had to maybe go a couple streets before you found anything too helpful to start your pinpointing.
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, I went west to the next major street and then just looked for that on the map and found it. Yeah, not the most difficult round. You probably could have also. Actually, never mind. I do now remember. I went east, down Stanley Street, and then saw okay, there's a lot of train tracks just to the east of me. So I just looked at where is a street called Stanley Street west of a lot of train tracks, and that was not too difficult to find.
Yeah, very nice. Let's see how the drivers did in Antwerp, and yeah, a bunch of 25Ks again. Those tricky rounds for you, Calamity, not catching off the likes of Mr. Blue, Pluki, and Boxa, which are our top 3. We can talk about it when we get to the standings, but Boxa's just he hasn't won a race since week 2, but he's been
Mm.
consistently on the podium in some fashion, which has really helped him still open up a huge lead against everybody else. Very good week for Colin. Again, another perfect game in those top points, as well as Barry. Nico also doing quite well with an ace. Perfect game in this one. Your teammate in ninth and Moist Flubber just sneaking in for that last point in this one. But again, a couple bad rounds. You can see quite a few scores around that 20,000 mark, which means 1 or 2 rounds really caught up people off. And the likes of M the Basement missing out on this one. Hidekmi, you Calamity, and Solar Sensei reverses his fortune in Belgium. Sees him down in 20th down there.
And the nice thing for me was at least that, round two was already enough for me to not get any points anyway, so
Mm.
I don't have to be too annoyed by round four. But yeah, as you said it, quite a few good weeks for people generally. The top 5 in the overall standings all picked up points in both races. Um, well, I should say the top 5 at the point after those races had passed,
Mm.
because I was in the top 5 before. Well, not anymore. Um, but yeah, in the sprint race, I think it was actually the first sprint race points for Pluki all season,
Mm.
who picks up a second place here. So that's nice for him. As you said, Box is still very consistent. Mr. Blue, with his first win this season, only his second podium.
Yeah.
Other than that, yeah, nice points for Pizzo Nico after a struggling feature race. And yeah, Shumi as well, after not picking, well, not even starting the feature race, picking up 4 points here. And
Mm.
well, Clemens at least make sure that it's at least some points for FGT racing this week.
Mm. Yeah, you're a little bit hard on yourself, Calamity. You say that you're not in the top 5. Well, you technically are, but you're tied with Barry on 75 points. I guess we could switch those around if you don't want to be in the top 5. I can put you 6th, I guess. Yeah, Colin though definitely helping his chances of being in the top 5 still by picking up plenty of points. Mr. Blue really jumps into this challenge here, and keeping sort of touch with Orpheus with his win. Orpheus again doing quite well in the feature race, but Boxa with 2 podiums again just keeps things growing that distance. Really, I should say, 193 points. He's looking to try to equal or better his record from points from last season.
Yeah, you are right, of course. I am. Biff, although, do you actually have a tiebreaker for the table?
I do not, because it's never been an issue. I guess we would do it just like we would do any race. We would look at the total
Yeah.
distance over the
Uh,
weeks. We'd have to do some
no,
math.
that makes no sense. I thought you were gonna say like in any racing series or any other competition where it's most wins and then most second places and then most
Oh
third
yeah,
places.
guess we
Um,
could do that.
that's the one that makes the most sense. In which case, I would currently be 5th and Barry would be 6th. I just sorted it by alphabet in my table, so that's why I didn't
Okay.
look at the points. So that's why I thought I was 6th. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I think my auto table does it that if they don't overtake you, you don't move. So
mm,
when it auto sorts, people are coming up from the below you, and so Barry equaled you but didn't pass you. So that's why you keep your 5th at least
yeah,
in the auto table. But
that makes
yeah.
sense.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Boxer running away with it. Still, Orpheus did actually not lose too many points. He only lost 2 points this week, and Mr. Blue even gained 2 points on Boxer. But obviously, at a point where they're 72 and 97 points behind, respectively, gaining or losing 2 or 3 points isn't really going to make much of a difference in the long run. But at least they've sort of stabilized themselves in the top 3 again. Yeah, a bit of a drop for me from 3rd down to 5th. Other than that, yeah, Colin, as we said before, finally a good week for him again, picking up 20 points and getting back into those top 5 himself. And yeah, apart from that, a few people at the bottom actually picking up points this week, with as we talked about with Hedigme, Shumi picking up a few, Pizanico and Solar Sensei, all kind of similar amounts though, so not really moving much, especially compared to each other. But at least moving past some of the people who picked up no points this week, such as Mwicholm, Wakelock, Laban Greb really struggling this season as well. I don't think he's missed a single race. He's just not picked
No,
up a point yet.
his scores have not been bad. They've just been always out of the top 10, right? And that's really frustrating when you're like, oh, I'm getting 24 this and 24 that, and it's just not good enough for a single point. You're like, what do I got to do? You got to get Norway back into the rotation, I guess, to get your home map, get some chance. But
Mm,
I mean, he is way down there. But we've got we've still got 4 weeks to go, and you can see here, a win or two could easily put him into the top 15, top 10 even, depending on how everybody else does. 25 points separating the likes of Shumi and Pluki and Moist Flubber there in 9th and 10th. So it's still pretty close between all these drivers. Of course, everybody else picks up points too, so you can kind of, it's not that simple, but definitely interesting after our halfway point in this one. I think the big surprise for me here is Colin. A
mm.
newcomer. We definitely would have thought Max would be the one carrying Nordhagen after the likes of Boxa leaving, but it's actually Colin on 88 points, almost doubling his teammate to this point is interesting. And Barry Fisher Bear not letting Boxa down at all. As we switch over to the Constructor Challenge standings, and we'll see that Oberhausen has a demanding lead, given that they've got 2 strong drivers. But Scantrum and Katsurvatsa equal on points after the nice showing by Mr. Blue this week. And Colin keeps Nordhagen in the race, at least in this one.
Yeah, it's still fairly close behind Oberhausen, who again picked up the most points this week with 58 points, with not only Boxer but also Barry having a very
Mm.
good week. So they're just making the gap bigger and bigger. Um, pretty decent week for Kasarivatsa and Skanström as well, who picked up 47 and 37 points respectively. And then behind that, points dropped off relatively quickly. And the bottom three, unfortunately, Cape, Orient, and Lancaster, again, not picking up any points at all, which I think is the first time this season that all three of those teams hadn't picked up a single point in a race weekend. I think the lowest until that point, at least, was Montenegro, where at least Lancaster picked up 1 point.
Mm.
But yeah, still very close in the middle there, and we could be in for a pretty exciting fight for at least second or third come the end of the season.
Yep. Okay, but before we get to our map for week 7, let's take a quick look at how the few remaining drivers in Formula G are shaping up. Again, it is Renata who did quite well in Belgium, 24-9, an excellent score in that seed, especially compared to the next two best drivers were 15,000 and 11,000. Ben seems to be doing playing the every other week game, shows up, plays, and disappears for the next week after that. Sees him DNS. For the standings, that means not a whole lot changes either. Everything's pretty much the same. Everybody's picking up points, except for Ben and DHZ, who has pretty much all but dropped off the map here. And yeah, it looks like it's still a pretty tight race for those positions. Ben is still on 70, so he just has to play a couple more races, and he could get into that top 3. But we are looking at Renata, Ankau, and Mkempe as pretty much the 3 drivers who are giving themselves a pretty good shot at taking a seat next season in Formula G. So our map for next week is Bulgaria. So might be an interesting one. I'm sure Mr. Blue is going to be hoping to pick up some points. He is Dutch, but he lives in Bulgaria. Well, at least most of the time. He does travel back and forth quite a bit. So it'll be sort of a second home turf for him there. But besides that, a pretty interesting country. Got a mountain range running through it, kind of like Romania. But then other than that, it can be a bit hard to distinguish where in the country you are.
Yeah, it's definitely not the easiest country to play. But generally Bulgaria is kind of like a country a bit like Belgium, where in like most rounds you probably don't have too much trouble finding out where you are. It's actually better signed than you'd expect most of the time. But that being said, there are quite a few areas where you might have problems, especially if you go the wrong direction and don't end up hitting one of the major roads and just find no signs at all to any bigger cities, and you're just left with like, hey, here's this little village, and 2 minutes later you find this other little village that, you'd have to zoom in like basically until you can see the ants on the floor on the map. Otherwise, they just don't show up. So we'll see what kind of rounds we'll have in the seed. Maybe a country where I'd expect the amount of points you need to get in the top 10 to be a little lower than in most of the other countries we've had so far this season.
Interesting. And Sofia, as the capital, what do you expect here? A pretty big, well-developed city. And when I was going through it for my map creation, I was really interested that a lot of the suburbs were very kind of blocky, like they got those perfectly aligned roads, but they didn't always match up with the neighboring neighborhood. So you've got like these perfect squares that then meet up imperfectly with other perfect squares and weird angles and things, and then so you can definitely kind of see how the city has grown over time if you get an aerial view of it. So it might be a little bit helpful in terms of getting some of this grid-based system in pinpointing and finding your way around the town. But then again, if you find one of those weird intersection places where they don't quite match up, it might be a little bit tricky.
I'd actually say probably if you find a weird little special intersection, you might be able to find it on the map more easily than if you just find, hey, there's a straight road and it meets the other straight road in like a 90-degree angle. Hey,
That's a good point.
that's not on the map a million times. So I think that might help you out, but you generally have to already know in which kind of area you are, probably even down to the block. Otherwise, it's probably not going to help you that much unless it's like two big roads meeting in a weird way. I think Sofia generally might be one of the most difficult cities we've got this season because
Mm.
it's not exactly littered with road names.
Yeah.
So you might have to work with some features, like maybe you work with the train tracks, or the, like, what is it actually called, the thing that's not a train but that goes through the city.
Trams.
Tram
Yeah.
tracks, yeah. um Maybe work with some of those. Maybe you'll find a big POI for something. Maybe you'll find one of the major roads. You probably have to work with those rather than with the things you usually do in cities, which would be suburb
Mm.
names or street names or something like that. There's
Mm.
also no river running through this city,
Yeah, I was
which
gonna
is
say that, but
very, very unusual for our season. So that won't be helping. But you do have a pretty big sort of a train track, or quite a lot of train tracks going through sort of the northern part of town. So
mm,
that's sort of like a river in a sense.
yeah, that big major train line and train station do kind of divide the city quite nicely for that. A fun fact about Bulgaria that I just remembered when I was looking it up is that most of the coverage was done in the fall or winter, so it won't be maybe the most beautiful race that we've had this season, but hopefully we'll get a few of those nice locations that actually have some greenery for us to look at. It's not just a bunch of gray and brown everywhere for that one. We'll get best of luck to all the drivers in Bulgaria, and we will see you all next week. Take care.
Bye.